So hello and welcome everyone to this tutorial session. In this video, we will understand what are tuples and how we can create and use them in Python. So we start off this video by understanding what are tuples and how we can create them. After this, we will discuss how we can implement indexing and slicing on tuples. Then we will discuss the immutability property of tuples in Python. Next, we will understand some of the basic operations that we can implement on tuples. And in the last, we will see some of the basic tuple methods. So without any further delay, let's jump on to our first topic and let's first understand what are tuples. So basically, tuples in Python is a sequence of ordered and immutable elements. Now these tuples are quite similar to list data type in Python that we have discussed in our previous session. Now both list and tuple are utilized to store sequence of elements. Moreover, these both data types can store any type of data in them, but there is a slight difference between tuple and list. Now, tuple in Python are immutable, which means we cannot modify the elements of the tuple once it has been specified, while list on the other side is mutable, which means we can modify the elements of the list. And we have also seen how we can do that in our previous tutorial sessions. Now to define a tuple in Python, we simply need to specify the tuple elements enclosed in parentheses and separated by comma. Although using parentheses is not mandatory, still it is recommended to use it because it improves the overall understanding and readability of code. So here we can see the basic example of a tuple. So while declaring a list, what we were doing, we were using the square brackets and we were defining multiple elements within those square brackets. Now for tuple, we use parentheses. Now let's discuss an example related to that. Now here you can see a basic example. So in this example, first we will understand how we can define a empty tuple. So to define an empty tuple, we simply need to define this empty parenthesis. So this is the name of the variable empty underscore tuple. Then we are using this assignment operator and then we have defined this empty parenthesis. So this will create an empty tuple. After this, as we told you, in a tuple we can store multiple elements. So here you can see another example. Here we have defined this variable employee underscore IDs and within this we have defined 6 integer values. So in the same way we have defined this names variable and then we have assigned this tuple. Now all values in this tuple are of string data type, but it is not always mandatory that a tuple should always consist data of same data type. It can consist data of different data types as well. So here you can see one more example. So here we have defined this user underscore data variable. In this variable we have defined a tuple. Now this tuple consists elements of different data type. So first element is of string data type. The value is this is Scott. Then there is an integer value 32. Then there is another string value. After this we have defined one float value and in the last we have defined one boolean value which is false. Now we can also check the data type of these variables using the type function. So for this what we have to do, we have to use this type function within the print function and we have to pass the name of the variable to the type function as an argument. So here you can see we are using 4 print statements and within the 4 print statements we are using this type function to check the type of all these variables, and when we execute this cell you can see it will return this output. This simply shows that all the variables belongs to this tuple class. Now after this, if we want to print the value of a tuple, we can simply use the print function and we need to pass the variable name. Here you can see we are printing the value of each tuple using the print function. So if I execute this cell, so here you can see the result. So first is an empty tuple. So empty tuple will look something like this only, empty parenthesis. Then we have defined this tuple with integer values. Then we have defined the tuple with the string values. And in the last, we have this heterogeneous tuple containing data of different data type. Now, as we told you initially, using parenthesis to define a tuple is not mandatory. So we can also define a tuple without using parenthesis. So in that case, what we need to do, we have to define our elements separated by a comma and the Python interpreter will automatically recognize that thing as a tuple. So here you can see we are executing the same example, but this time what we have done, we are not using parentheses. So all the elements are defined without parentheses, simply separated by a comma. And let me execute this cell. And after this, what we are doing, we are using the same type function to check the data type of these variables. So here you can see all the variables are automatically of tuple data type. then we are simply printing out their values using the print function. So here you can see when we print the tuple, it will be printed out with parentheses automatically. Now till now we have seen how we can define an empty tuple or how we can define a tuple with sequence of elements. But what if we want to define a tuple with only single element? So in that case, we need to define a comma just after the element value. Now using this comma is quite important because without this, the Python interpreter will not recognize it as a tuple. So let us discuss one example related to this as well. So how we can define a single element in a tuple. So here you can see a simple example. So we have defined this name variable, and within this name variable we are defining this value. So we have defined parenthesis, and within the parenthesis we have defined this string value. Now here we are not using any comma to separate this element. So if I try to print the data type of this name variable, Python interpreter will recognize this variable as a string data type. Now to overcome this thing, we have to use the comma. So here you can see I have defined the same name variable. So just after the value, string value, I have defined this comma. Now if I try to print the data type of this variable again, this time the Python interpreter will recognize this as a tuple. So this is how we can define a single element tuple. Now let's move to our next topic. So next let's discuss how we can implement indexing and slicing on tuple. Now just like list and all other sequence data type, we can implement indexing and slicing on a tuple as well. And indexing and slicing on tuple will also be executed in the same way as we executed on list and string. So here you can see the illustration of indexing. So how we can index any tuple? We need to define the name of the tuple followed by the indexing operator, which is this square brackets, and within the square brackets we need to define the index that we want to access. Now for positive indexes, the index will start from 0, and we can also use negative indexes. Now let's discuss an example related to it. So here we have defined a sample tuple. Now within this tuple we have defined data of different data types. So first is this 201, which is an integer data type. Then we have defined a string value John. Then we have defined a float value. Then we have defined a boolean value, and then we have defined one more string value. So if we want to fetch the first element using indexing, then we need to specify the name of the variable followed by this square brackets, and within the square brackets we need to specify 0. So this will return the very first element, which is 201. After this, if I want to execute the very last element, then we can use the negative indexes. So to fetch the very last element, we need to specify the index -1. So for second print statement, it will return the very last element, which is brown. And then what we are doing, we are fetching the element given at index 2. So we have defined this name of the tuple followed by this square brackets. Within the square brackets, we have defined 2. So it will return the element which is at index 2. So what is the element at index 2? At 0, we have 201. At 1 we have John, and at 2 we have 88.9. So if I execute this cell, here you can see the result. So first element in the tuple is 201, which is correct. Again, the last element in the tuple is brown, we have seen that, and the element at index 2 is 88.9. Now just like indexing, we can also implement slicing. Now the role of slicing is to fetch series of elements from a tuple, and for this what we do, we need to use the slicing operator, which is the colon. So here you can see the implementation. So the implementation of slicing a tuple is same as we were doing in case of a list. So here you can see this example. Here we have defined this employee IDs. So if we slice our tuple from index 0 to 2, then these two values will be returned. So 101 is the element at index 0 and 102 is the element at index 1, and the element given at index 2 will be excluded from the result. In the same way, we can utilize negative indexes for slicing. So here we are slicing from index -3 to -1. So at -3 we have 102. At -2 we have 103, and -1 will be excluded from our result. So these two values will be returned for this slicing. And just like list, it is not always important to specify all the indexes. So we can either skip the starting index, or we can skip the ending index, or we can also skip both and just specify a colon to specify complete sequence of elements. So for this third statement, it will start the slicing from index 1 and it will go till the very end. So the element at index 1 is 102, and it will return all the elements after that. So 102, 103, 104 is the result for it. So here you can see the example related to slicing. Here we have defined the same sample tuple. Now very first what we are doing, we are slicing from index 0 to index 2. So it will return the element at index 0 which is 201, and it will return the element given at index 1 which is John, and the element at index 2 which is 88.9 will be excluded. In the same way, we are slicing from index 1 to minus 2. So it will start from this value John and it will go till Brown, but this Brown value will be excluded. Then if we want to start our index from index 2 till the very last, we can use this thing. So here we have defined only the starting index and we have not defined the ending index. So it will automatically slice from index 2 to the very last element. In the same way, if we know where we want to end and we want to start from the starting index, we don't need to define it. So here you can see another example where we are not defining any starting index. We are simply using this colon, and then we are using the negative index to define the ending index of this slicing. So it will start from the very first element in the tuple and it will go till minus 3. So let me execute this cell. So here you can see the results. Now you can also tell all the results yourself. Now after this, let's discuss the immutability property of tuple. So just like strings in Python, tuples are also immutable in nature. It simply means that once we have defined the elements of the tuple, we cannot modify them, neither do we can delete them. But what we can do, we can either delete the entire tuple using the del keyword, or we can reassign new elements to the tuple using the assignment operator. So let's discuss example related to them as well. Now here you can see a basic example related to immutability. So what we are doing here, we have defined this employee ID is variable and we are defining this tuple value to it. In this tuple value we have 6 integer values starting from 301 to 306. Now if we want to modify the value of the element given at index 2, so we generally use this thing. We first use the indexing. So here we have defined this name of the variable and we have defined this index, and then we are using this assignment operator to change its value to 203. But this thing is not possible in the case of tuple because they are immutable. So if I try to execute this cell, here you can see the Python interpreter will return an error. Now this error states tuple objects does not support item assignment. It simply means we cannot assign any new value to any element in the tuple. But what we can do, we can reassign the whole tuple to the same variable. Here you can see a basic example where we are reassigning the set of tuple values to this employee underscore IDs. And now if I try to print the value of this tuple, so instead of getting any error or instead of getting the previous value, we got the modified tuple. It starts from 401 and goes till 405. And one more thing that we can do, so we cannot delete any single element from a tuple, but we can delete the complete tuple. So for that we have to use the del keyword. So we need to specify the del keyword followed by the name of the tuple. Here we are deleting this tuple that we have defined above, and then if I try to use the print function to print the tuple, the Python interpreter will return an error because after deleting, the interpreter will not be able to find the tuple in the memory. Now with this, I hope the concept of immutable tuple is clear to you. Now let's move forward and next let's discuss some of the basic operations that we can implement on tuple. So these are the set of basic operations that we can implement. Very first is the addition. Now for addition, what we use the plus operator, and what we can do, we can merge the result of one or more tuples. Next is the replication. Now in replication, we use the multiply operator to replicate the elements of the tuple. Now just like list, we can also find the length of a tuple. So for that we use the len function. Then we can use membership operators. So there are basically two membership operators, in and not in, and we can use both of these operators on tuple to check whether the given element is present within the tuple or not. And in the last, we can implement iteration on tuples. So in iteration, we utilize the looping statements for loop or while loop to iterate through each element in the tuple. Now let's start discussing the examples related to all of these operations. So let's first discuss the example related to addition. So in this example, we have defined two tuples, name underscore 1 and name underscore 2. Then we are merging both of the tuples into the final variable, and for this purpose what we are doing, we are using the plus operator, and in the last we are printing out the value of the final tuple. So if I execute this cell, here you can see the result. In the final tuple, all the values given in name underscore 1 and name underscore 2 are merged to form a single tuple. And now in the same way we can also utilize the multiply operator. For this what we have done, we have defined one names variable and we have defined a tuple value to it containing all string values. So after this we are taking an integer value as an input from the user and we are storing it in the n variable, and then we are defining the result. So in the result we are multiplying the value of n with the names tuple and we are simply printing out the result using the print function. So if I execute this cell, let me pass 2 as an integer value, and if I hit enter, here you can see each element in the tuple will be replicated 2 times. So here you can see John is coming up 2 times, Adam is coming up 2 times, Chris is coming up 2 times. So every element is coming 2 times. Now we can also calculate the length of a tuple. So here you can see a basic example. We have defined this names variable, then we have defined a length variable, and this length variable we are assigning the len function, and within the len function we have passed the name of our tuple, which is names, and in the last we are printing out the length. So what it will do, it will return the length of the complete tuple. So here we can easily see the length of the tuple is 5. So if I execute this cell, so here you can see the length of the tuple is 5. We got our result. Now in the same fashion we can also utilize the membership operators. So what we are doing in this example, we are taking employee ID as an input from the user and we are storing it in the emp underscore ID variable. Then we have defined one employee ID tuple which contain various employee IDs. Now what we are doing here, we are using the if else statement to check whether the given input employee ID is there in the tuple or not. Now if the input employee ID is there in the tuple, then it will return this message stating yes, the employee is from this department, else it will return no. So if I execute this cell, and let me first pass 201, which is the very first value of this tuple, and let me hit enter. So here you can see it has returned this thing, yes, the employee is from this department. And if I try to execute this code block again, and this time I put random value any, let me put 432 and hit enter. So it has returned this thing, no, the employee is not from this department. And here you can see we are using this in membership operator. Now let's move to a next example and let's understand about this iteration. So what we are doing in this example, we have defined a tuple containing all integer values. Then we are simply calculating the sum of all the integer values. After this we have initialized a sum variable and we have defined its value to 0. Then we are using a for loop, and within the for loop we are calculating the sum of all the values given in the tuple. So if I execute this cell, so here you can see the result, the sum is 26. Now I hope all these basic operations are clear to you. Now let's move to our next topic and let's discuss about some of the basic tuple methods. Now, unlike string and list, Python does not have too many built-in methods related to tuple. The main reason behind this is the immutable nature of the tuple. As we cannot modify or delete any element from the tuple, there are only two methods available related to tuples. So these two methods are count and index. So the count method will calculate how many times the given element appears in the tuple. Then there is index method. So this index method will simply return the index value of the specified element from the tuple. So we can understand the use of these two methods better with the help of an example. So here you can see one example. Here what we have done, first we have defined one tuple variable random underscore tuple which consists some random integer values. Then we are using the print function to print the value of the tuple. Next we are taking input from the user. Now this input will be of integer type and we are asking the user to enter any element from the tuple for which you want the count. So then we are simply using this count method to calculate the count of the element given as input. Then we are again taking an input from the user. This input will be used to calculate the index of that element. So we are simply using the index method with our random underscore tuple to get the index of the given input element. So let me execute this cell. So here is our tuple. Now here we need to enter any element from the tuple for which we want the count. So I want the count for 2, and if I hit enter, Here you can see it has returned this thing. The count of the given element is 3. Now this element 2 has come 3 times in this tuple. So that's why it has returned 3 as a result. Next, we need to enter an element from the tuple for which we want the index. So I want the index for element 17, and if I hit enter, it will return the index of that element. So element 2 is at index 1. So the element 2 is at index 0, then 12 is at index 1, 13 is at index 2, 16 is at index 3, and 17 is at index 4. So that's why we got this result. The given element is at index number 4. So with this, we have come to the end of this tutorial session. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.